Alright, so let's reopen this image in Camera Raw, which you can simply just double-click the image here, and it should reopen. So we've got this in Camera Raw. Let's talk about the histogram. So the histogram is this curve, this measurement of color and light in your image, okay? And essentially, the histogram shows you where different things in your image lie. The left side is the dark parts of your image, and the right side are the bright parts of your image. What this histogram tells me right now is that my image is very dark. So generally, you should, of course it's going to be a dark image. It's a picture of a black cat, right? But we really don't want our raw image to be in this zone, okay? Now, our final image can be in that zone. If that's intentional, that's fine. But we really want to what's called color correct our image. And if I look right here, there's a clipping warning. That's what these little teardrops represent. So this is a shadow clipping warning, and this is a highlight clipping warning. And what you can see is that I have so much in the shadows that I've turned on this warning, and that warning is basically letting me know, hey, I'm losing data. Sorry, I didn't mean to adjust that. I'm losing data in the shadows. So I'm losing some data here and some data here. So what you generally want to do is whenever you find the image that you really want to work with, we want to adjust it in Camera Raw to be as close to a bell curve as we kind of can, okay? So it should be sort of a flat, honestly it should look kind of boring. That's okay. You want it to look boring so that whenever you then edit it, you can make it look beautiful. So I'm just going to kind of zoom in here and let's start adjusting some things. So you can, as you saw before, drag directly on the histogram and it will change it. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend going through some of the settings. So let's go to the basic settings. We have white balance, which is the color. It actually has this great little setting where you can change to different presets, but also this eyedropper lets you pick if you have a piece of white something in the scene, you can pick that. But we have temperature and tint. Those are both related to color and white balance. And you'll notice as I change those, the regions of my little valleys and hills, the colors change as they move around. So I'm just going to set that back to as shot, which is how I shot it, because I'm pretty happy with the color. So then exposure, right, is going to change the overall exposure. I'm going to move my shadows back to 0. It's going to change the overall sort of movement of this histogram. If I pull it up, it's going to move the histogram up. As you can see, if I pull it down, it's going to move the histogram down. So once again, in Camera Raw, I am not looking to make my image beautiful as my final picture. Okay, I can do that in Photoshop with adjustment layers, which I'll show you in the next video. We just want to kind of try to get our histogram somewhere in the middle. We want to correct it. So I'm going to move my exposure up. So I'm just going to move it up, 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 up. And let's see what contrast does. That's going to separate our mountains or pull them together. So I'm going to lower the contrast a bit. And you can see all this data I just pulled out of the shadow, right? So here's the, let's do a before and after, which I can't remember what the keyboard shortcut is. I think it's Y. Or no, it's Q, sorry. So Q will show us the before and after. And there's a bunch of different before and after views. So we can see, like, okay, yeah, we have recovered some of that data. And again, we're going to change this later because I kind of like the original look. Highlights, if I pull it down, it's going to move me in the darker range. If I pull it up, it's going to make those highlights, which are the brightest parts of the image, brighter. So for now, I'm just going to leave that at 0. Shadows, if I pull up, are going to make the darkest parts brighter. If I pull down, the darkest parts are going to get darker. I'll leave that where it is. Whites and blacks are kind of the same thing as highlights and shadows, but you'll play with them and notice that there's a little bit of difference there. And then texture clarity and dehaze I don't recommend using. You can do these things in Photoshop much better. Vibrance will add more color or less color, and it's the same with saturation. Again, I don't necessarily recommend changing these that much. So I'm pretty happy with this. I've moved my curve without completely, ruining my image. I could move it a little bit further down, maybe like right there. I still have a little bit in the shadows that I'm losing, but that's okay. But I have more to work with. Again, we're just doing this so we have more to work with. We're not doing this to make it look perfect. So I'll hit open, and it's going to open up in Photoshop. Now there are a few other things in here that you could change. You could change the curves. some of the noise reduction. So I have a lot of noise in this image, and if I reduce that, it will try to perform this kind of algorithm. You can see it happening right now. I don't regularly recommend using it. It's not the best, and it can produce some weird effects. My recommendation is just pay attention to noise whenever you shoot, you know. And then if you have colors and things that you need to change, split toning is having like multiple hues, and again, we can work with that in Photoshop, so I'm not too worried about it right now. There's other things like effects in here, again, not my thing. Now the calibration is very important, okay, and calibration is going to be used basically in a couple different ways, but you might have like an issue with your camera where you need to calibrate your colors. You can certainly do that. The optics will also come up where if you're using like a full frame camera, this is not a full frame, this is a micro four thirds crop factor. But if you know what that means, if you know you're using a full frame camera, you will have to play with this distortion to fix some distortion in your image. That's not uncommon at all. There's also in this optics menu, there's a little profile button that says remove chromatic aberrations. That has to deal with, like, if you see like little, actually we have some right here. There's like a little bit of kind of color bleed happening here. My camera, or the EP08, has some issues with like purple bleeding, but you could check that box to try to remove chromatic aberration. You could also import a profile, like I could say, okay, I for example own a, let's see, we'll say it's an Olympus. Oh, they didn't even have Olympus on here. Okay, I have a Ricoh GR3. Okay, and I could say it's a Ricoh GR3 and fix it, and it'll try and fix it for me. All right, there's also some defringe settings which will help you. Again, that's the thing I was talking about, where there might be some fringe colors that bleed, and you could zoom in and try to fix them with this setting. Those are the only things I would do in Camera Raw. I wouldn't do any major adjustments here. This is just you really playing with these settings to get a good flat looking image. I'm going to go ahead and just turn off the preview and say open. And in the next video, we're going to actually make our adjustments in Photoshop directly.